Cobra. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel where we bring the most iconic action stories to life. Today we are diving into a true movie story, Cobra. Cobra is a 1986 American action film directed by George P. Cosmatos and written by Sylvester Stallone, who stars in the titular role. The film, loosely based on the 1974 novel A Running Duck by Paula Gosling, later published as Fair Game and filmed under that title in 1995, co-stars Reni Santoni, Brigitte Nielsen, and Andrew Robinson. Cobra follows Los Angeles Police Lieutenant Marion Cobra Cobretti, who investigates a string of violent crimes and also protects Ingrid Knudsen, a witness targeted by the perpetrators. Cobra is the final film which featured the collaboration between Stallone and Nielsen after Rocky IV, 1985, until Creed II, 2018, and the only film the pair are both featured in while married to one another in real life, before their divorce a year later. The script was largely inspired by Stallone's original script for Beverly Hills Cop, 1984. Cobra was released to generally negative reviews with criticism on its excessive violence and overuse of genre tropes, but it was a box office success and has since been considered a cult classic. When a mass shooting at a Los Angeles supermarket evolves into a hostage crisis, the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, summons Lieutenant Marion Cobra Cobretti of their elite zombie squad to resolve the incident. Cobretti confronts the shooter, who espouses social Darwinist ideals and mentions a new world. Cobretti kills him before he can execute a group of hostages. Detective Monty reprimands Cobretti for disregarding police procedure, and Cobretti admonishes a group of reporters for not prioritizing the safety of the victims. Unbeknownst to the authorities, the supermarket incident is part of a string of violent crimes committed by the New World, a cult that despises modern society and believes in killing the weak, leaving only the strongest and smartest to rule. Ingrid Knudsen, a local model and businesswoman, becomes the New World's priority target after she witnesses the group and their leader, the Night Slasher, on a killing spree. Knudsen is placed under the protective custody of Cobretti and his partner Sergeant Tony Gonzalez following an attempt on her life. After more attempts to kill Knudsen and Cobretti, Cobretti theorizes that an organization is behind this, but his theory is rebuffed by his superiors. Cobretti and Gonzalez leave with Knudsen to the small town of San Ramos, where Cobretti and Knudsen fall in love. Nancy Stock, an LAPD officer and New World's second-in-command, infiltrates the police escort. At dawn, the New World arrives in San Ramos on motorcycles and besieges the town on Stock's instructions. In a shootout, Cobretti kills many cultists, but Gonzalez is wounded. Cobretti and Knudsen flee in a pickup truck, which the cultists wreck with a roadblock. The pair flee to a steel mill, where Cobretti defeats the rest of the cultists and Stock is accidentally shot by the Night Slasher. Cobretti fights with the Night Slasher in hand-to-hand combat and impales him on a hook that drags him into a furnace. The California Highway Patrol secures San Ramos and rescues Gonzalez. As Cobretti is cleared by his superiors, Monty initially appears apologetic, only to again chastise Cobretti for overdoing it, prompting Cobretti to punch Monty in the face before riding away with Knudsen on a motorcycle. Cast: Sylvester Stallone as Lieutenant Marion Cobra Cobretti, Brigitte Nielsen as Ingrid Knudsen, Reni Santoni as Sergeant Tony Gonzalez, Andrew Robinson as Detective Monty, Brian Thompson as Night Slasher, John Hertzfeld as Cho, Lee Garlington as Officer Nancy Stock, Art LaFleur as Captain Sears, Marco Rodriguez as Supermarket Killer, Ross St. Philip as Security Guard, Val Gavery as Chief Hallowell, David Rask as Dan, Nick Ungodi as Potsky, When Sylvester Stallone was signed to play the lead Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop, he decided to rewrite the script almost completely, removing nearly all the comedic aspects and turning it into an action movie that he felt was better suited to him. The studio read his revised script and rejected it. The proposed action scenes would have increased the budget far beyond what they planned. Stallone later channeled his ideas for it into an original script. When Stallone left Beverly Hills Cop, Eddie Murphy was brought in to play the lead role. The novel A Running Duck, which was also published as Fair Game by Paula Gosling, was cited as source material, enough so that she received a screen credit. Stallone's earlier draft of the script contained many differences from later drafts and the final film. These include the opening shootout taking place in a movie theater, instead of a supermarket, during which many more people are killed, Marion, Cobra, Cabretti mentioning how he had a girlfriend who was killed by a psychopath he was trying to catch, an additional nighttime action sequence on a boat where Cobra and Ingrid Knudsen are hiding and are attacked by the Night Slasher's cultists, with Cobra and Tony Gonzalez managing to kill them all, and a different ending, in which Monty, revealed to be the actual leader of the New World, attempts to kill Ingrid at the last second before being killed by Cabretti. Stallone stated that he saw his character as Bruce Springsteen with a badge. The line, "This is where the law stops and I start, sucker," was inspired by a line spoken by Boone Hagenbeck, Steve McQueen, in The Reavers. Cobra needed much additional editing because the film was so graphically violent that it originally received an X rating. It was edited to receive an R rating. Brian Thompson auditioned 7 times before he was hired. On the 4th audition he met Stallone, who thought that Thompson was too nice to play the Night Slasher. But after a screen test, he immediately got the job. Also, in the original script, the Night Slasher was called Abaddon, possibly after the Angel of the Abyss from the Bible. Thompson repeatedly sought Stallone's advice about how to play the Night Slasher, including questions about his background and personal motivations, but Stallone showed no interest in the subject and told Thompson that the character was simply evil. In an unfortunate surprise for Thompson, after filming was completed, director George P. Cosmatos unexpectedly told him, "You could have been good if you had listened to me." Stallone acknowledged Dirty Harry as an influence, and Cobra reunited 2 actors from the film, Reni Santoni and Andy Robinson. Brigitte Nielsen, Stallone's then wife who he had met filming Rocky IV, was cast as Ingrid Knudsen. Originally, Cobra was supposed to be filmed in Seattle, climaxing with a motorcycle chase scene on a ferry between the islands. Even though everything was prepared to start filming the final theatrical version of the scene at night, Stallone demanded the ending be changed because of the mosquito problem at that time, which would have made nighttime filming very difficult to endure. The supporting cast and extras were forbidden from talking to Stallone on set. At one point during filming, Stallone complained to cinematographer Rick Waite that they were falling behind and that he needed to push his crew to work harder. Waite responded by telling Stallone that the delays were due to his fooling around with Nielsen and showing off for his bodyguards. Although Stallone was shocked that somebody would talk to him that way, he cleaned up his act and behaved more professionally, although he returned to his old egocentric behavior a few weeks later. Waite later said in an interview that, despite his huge ego, Stallone had a great sense of humor. He said Cosmatos would have made a great producer, but he was a terrible director. During a stunt scene, driver Kerry Rossall and another stuntman were injured after Rossall intentionally crashed a van into a wall. Nielsen was nearly hit by the van during a previous take. For the Night Slasher's monologue in the lead-up to the final fight, Thompson did the scene with the script supervisor standing in for Stallone, who was busy watching a basketball game on TV. The custom 1950 Mercury driven by Cobra was actually owned by Sylvester Stallone. The studio produced stunt doubles of the car for use in some of the action sequences, such as the jump from the second floor of the parking garage. The production built 3 Cobra cars for stunt work. Although they were identical on the outside, their moving parts were designed for specific sequences involving high-speed swipes with other vehicles, 180-degree turns, jumps, and 360-degree spins. The knife used by the Night Slasher was made for the film by knife designer Herman Schneider. Sylvester Stallone asked Schneider to create a knife that audiences would never forget. Cobra uses a custom Colt Gold Cup National Match 1911, modified to chamber 9 by 19 mm parabellum. Later in the film, he uses a Jatomatic submachine gun. The first rough cut was over 2 hours long. The closest estimated original running time is 130 minutes. It was then shortened to a roughly 2-hour director's cut, which was intended to be released in theaters. However, after Top Gun became a smash hit, Stallone and Warner Brothers were worried that Cobra, which would premiere the following week, would be overshadowed, so in order to ensure at least one extra screening each day, the movie was heavily re-edited. Stallone removed much of the plot and scenes involving characters other than his own. Warner Brothers also demanded that the more graphic scenes be cut down or removed entirely because they were too intense, and that some action scenes be cut for pacing. The extended television version of the film is approximately 6 minutes longer than the theatrical release. When first submitted to the MPAA, the film received an X rating, necessitating even more cuts. Stan Bush's song, "The Touch," heard in the Transformers, the movie, 1986, was originally written for Cobra. 20, it is said, "Feel the Heat," was overheard during the filming of its music video by Jean Beauvoir when they were editing in the same building complex, and was added because Stallone loved the song. Cobra opened the widest for a Warner Brothers release at the time, 21, opening on 2,131 screens and debuted at number 1 at the U.S. box office with a Memorial Day weekend debut of $15.70 million. 6. It eventually went on to gross $160 million, for over 6 times its estimated $25 million budget. 2. According to the New York Times, the film was still considered a disappointment because its $48 million at the box office in the U.S. did not live up to the success of Rambo. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 17% based on 23 reviews, with an average rating of 3.40/10. The website's consensus reads, "A disengaged Sylvester Stallone plays the titular Cobra with no bite in this leaden action thriller, crazily fixated on wanton carnage and nothing else." 23. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 25 out of 100 based on 9 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. 24. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film a grade B on scale of A to F. TV Guide stated that Stallone's character is an empty hulk. The few attempts to provide us with little insights into his character are downright laughable. 26. Nina Danton of the New York Times opined that the film pretends to be against the wanton violence of a disintegrating society, but it's really the apotheosis of that violence. It shows such contempt for the most basic American values, 27, and Vincent can be called disturbing for the violence it portrays, the ideas it represents, and the large number of people who will undoubtedly go to see it and cheer on its dangerous hero. 28. Sheila Benson of the Los Angeles Times panned the film, saying, "Cobra's pretentious emptiness, its dumbness, its two-faced morality make it a movie that begs to be laughed off." 29. Variety called it a sleek, extremely violent and exciting police thriller, and compared Cobra favorably to Rocky Balboa and John Rambo. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune compared Cobra to Dirty Harry when giving the film 2.5 stars and summarizing it as filthy Harry. He wrote, "Whereas Clint Eastwood simply would have squinted at Robinson, Stallone takes a more violent approach. Maybe that's the difference between actors. Eastwood can be droll, Stallone more often crosses the border to primeval." 31. Siskel and Roger Ebert did not give the film a feature review on their series at the movies, but both gave it negative attention during a late 1986 segment on new video releases, in which Siskel noted that the film had a great opening sequence, the supermarket hostage scene, and couldn't maintain the momentum. Ebert lamented that Stallone was squandering his talent and vast potential. In the 1996 movie guide Scene That, Now What?, the film was given the rating of C-, stating that the film is a graceless vigilante thriller that's strictly for hardcore action junkies. Then U.S. President Ronald Reagan viewed this film at Camp David on June 6, 1986. Cobra was nominated for 6 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Stallone, Worst Actress, Brigitte Nielsen, Worst Supporting Actor and Worst New Star, both for Thompson, and Worst Screenplay, Stallone. Director Nicholas Winding Refn is a fan of Cobra. In Refn's cult film Drive, the main character, the driver, Ryan Gosling, has a toothpick in his mouth in some scenes. This is Refn's homage to the opening scene where Cobra has a matchstick in his mouth. Gosling also said in an interview that he is a fan of Stallone and Cobra, which is why he borrowed his character's toothpick habit from Cobra. In 1986, the film was made into a video game by Ocean Software for the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, and Amstrad CPC 36. Aborted sequel and TV series. In 1987, Canon Films, along with Warner Brothers, attempted to make a sequel, Cobra Part 2, but the film never materialized. 37. In 2019, a television series was in development with Robert Rodriguez serving as director/creator. 38. 39. As of 2025, it is not known if this project is still in development. George Pan Cosmatos, January 4, 1941 to April 19, 2005, was a Greek-Italian film director and screenwriter. Following early success in his home country with drama films such as Massacre in Rome with Richard Burton, based on the real-life Ardeatine massacre, Cosmatos retooled his career towards mainstream, blockbuster action and adventure films, including The Cassandra Crossing and Escape to Athena, both of which were British-Italian co-productions. After relocating to North America, he directed the horror film of unknown origin, 1. This was followed by some of his best-known work, including the action films Rambo, First Blood Part 2 and Cobra, both of which star Sylvester Stallone, the science fiction horror film Leviathan, and the critically acclaimed Western movie Tombstone. Cosmatos was born to a Greek family in Florence, Italy, and grew up in Egypt and Cyprus. 1. He is said to have spoken 6 languages. 2. After studying film at the London Film School, where he met his future wife, Swedish sculptor and artist Birgitte Ljungberg, when they both were 17, he became assistant director to Otto Preminger on Exodus, 1960, based on Leon Uris's novel about the birth of Israel. 1. In 1960, he married Birgitte, born in Haverhill, Henge Municipality in Medelpad, July 26, 1941. Thereafter he worked on Zorba the Greek, 1964, in which Cosmatos had a small part as Boy with Acne. On February 1, 1974, the couple had their first and only child, Panos Cosmatos, born in Rome. In the early 1980s, the family moved to Victoria, British Columbia. Career. Cosmatos found success in Italy for directing the films Rapasaglia, 1973, with Marcello Mastroianni, and The Cassandra Crossing, 1976, with Sophia Loren. In 1979, he made the British World War II adventure film Escape to Athena, starring an all-star ensemble cast including Roger Moore, David Niven, Telly Savalas, Elliot Gould, and Claudia Cardinali. He made his North American directorial debut with the Canadian horror film of unknown origin. He then directed the box office hit Rambo: First Blood Part 2 starring Sylvester Stallone, and Cobra, another Stallone film, in 1986. 3. On August 8, 1986, Cosmatos agreed with De Laurentiis Entertainment Group to direct 4 films, but none would be made. 4. In 1989, he directed the science fiction horror film Leviathan, starring Peter Weller, Richard Crenna, Ernie Hudson, and Amanda Pays, with special effects designed by Stan Winston. Late in his career, Cosmatos received more praise for Tombstone, a 1993 Western movie about Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. This film was particularly praised for the exceptional performance of Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday. Kurt Russell, who played Wyatt Earp, said Stallone recommended Cosmatos to him after the removal of the first director, writer Kevin Jah, but Cosmatos had also worked with Tombstone executive producer Andrew G. Vagina before on Rambo: First Blood Part 2. On July 6, 1997, his wife Brigitte died. She is buried where she was born, and Cosmatos' career came to a halt. Outside of his film career, Cosmatos was a collector of rare books, focusing mainly on 19th to 20th century English literature and signed and inscribed works. His library was sold through Sotheby's. 5. George Pan Cosmatos died of lung cancer on April 19, 2005, at his home in Victoria, British Columbia at the age of 64. 6. He was survived by his son, Panos Cosmatos, who has said that his independently released surreal film Beyond the Black Rainbow was funded primarily by royalties from his father's film Tombstone. Massacre in Rome, Italian, Rapasaglia, is a 1973 Italian war drama film directed by George Pan Cosmatos. 1. About the Ardeatine massacre, which occurred at the Ardeatine Caves in Rome, March 24, 1944, committed by the Germans as a reprisal for a partisan attack against the SS police regiment Bozen. 2. The film was based on the 1967 book Death in Rome by Robert Katz. 3. An Italian court gave producer Carlo Ponti and director Cosmatos a 6-month suspended sentence for their film which plain Pope Pius XII knew of and did nothing about the execution of Italian hostages by the Germans. The charges eventually were dropped on appeal. 4. The names of the victims are shown in the closing credits, as opposed to the cast credits and crew members. The film follows Rome Gestapo chief Herbert Kappler, who carries out the killings of 335 mostly randomly and hurriedly selected victims in revenge for partisans killing 33 Germans, using a ratio of 10 Italian victims for every German. However, they had rounded up 5 more than expected but continued on with their plan. Meanwhile, the Vatican stands by and issues no condemnation. The film is based on the book Death in Rome by Robert Katz, who also wrote the screenplay with George P. Cosmatos. 2. Katz, the author of the book Death in Rome on which the film was based, was involved in a criminal libel suit in Italy over the contents of his book. The suit was launched by Countess Elisabetta Pacelli Rossignani, the sister of Pope Pius XII. Author Katz, producer Carlo Ponti, and director Cosmatos were charged with defaming the memory of the Pope Pius XII regarding the Pope's alleged knowledge and not objecting to the Ardeatine massacre. All were found guilty, with Katz sentenced to 14 months and Ponti and Cosmatos sentenced to 6 months. 5. but the charges were rendered moot by a general amnesty. 7. Historical accuracy. Herbert Kapler, Richard Burton, is depicted in the film as being a tired, worn-out man, who is disillusioned with the Nazi cause and believes that the fall of Nazi Germany is imminent. In reality, Kapler was a zealous Nazi and was sent to Rome for exactly this reason. During his time as head of the Sicherheitspolizei, security police, in Rome, Kapler organized the roundups of thousands of innocent victims, oversaw raids on Jewish homes for looted valuables, and was a key figure in transporting Italian Jews to Nazi death camps. At the time of the massacre, Herbert Kapler was 37 years old. Actor Burton was just short of his 48th birthday when the film was produced, 11 years older than Kapler would have been at the time. Father Pietro Antonelli, Marcello Mastroianni, is a combination of several different Vatican officials who personally knew Kapler, the most significant of whom was Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, who appears in the television film The Scarlet and the Black. One prisoner, a deserter from the Austrian army who had pretended to be an Italian, was allowed to live as a citizen of the Reich, and he was the only witness to tell the tale of the courageous behavior of the resistance priest, Don Pietro Papagallo, who blessed those about to be killed, before he himself met his fate. A body lies in the Via Rasella during the roundup of civilians by German and Italian soldiers after the partisan bombing on March 23, 1944. The SS victims of the partisan attack are referred to throughout the film as German soldiers, when in fact the company which was attacked was the 11th Company of the 3rd Battalion of the SS Police Regiment Bozen, which was composed of ethnic Austrians from German-speaking South Tyrol annexed by Italy after the First World War. Historically, the unit also did not wear SS uniforms, but rather regular German police uniforms of the Ordnungspolizei. Kurt Malzer, Leo McCurran, is shown throughout the film giving direct orders to SS units and personally supervising the build-up to the massacre organized by Kapler. In reality, while several regular Wehrmacht officers did issue orders to the SS during this period, as well as Kapler and Malzer personally discussing the operation, Kapler and his men were under the SS and police leader chain of command, and it was through these channels that most of the official orders concerning the massacre were issued. Another man working with the SS was Captain Eric Priebke, Brooke Williams, who is depicted in the film. He had full knowledge of the massacre, but would hide for many years evading justice. Then, on nationwide TV in the 1990s, ABC News reporter Sam Donaldson found and confronted him about the massacre, leading him to say he followed orders. Argentinian authorities quickly arrested and extradited him to Italy. He was tried and convicted of mass murder. Colonel Eugen Dullman, John Steiner, was never Kapler's direct superior, as is implied several times in the film. In reality, Kapler answered to the office of SS Obergruppenführer Karl Wolff, who also maintained his headquarters in Rome. Wolff is never seen or mentioned in the film. In reality, he stood trial and was found guilty of killing Italian Jews as part of the operations in Italy. When he became sick, his sentence was reduced and he was released in 1971. War film is a film genre concerned with warfare, typically about naval, air, or land battles, with combat scenes central to the drama. It has been strongly associated with the 20th century. 2. The fateful nature of battle scenes means that war films often end with them. Themes explored include combat, survival and escape, camaraderie between soldiers, sacrifice, the futility and inhumanity of battle, the effects of war on society, and the moral and human issues raised by war. War films are often categorized by their milieu, such as the Korean War. The most popular subjects are the Second World War and the American Civil War. The stories told may be fiction, historical drama, or biographical. Critics have noted similarities between the Western and the war film. Nations such as China, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia have their own traditions of war film, centered on their own revolutionary wars but taking varied forms, from action and historical drama to wartime romance. Subgenres, not necessarily distinct, include anti-war, comedy, propaganda, and documentary. There are similarly subgenres of the war film in specific theaters such as the Western Desert of North Africa and the Pacific in the Second World War, Vietnam, or the Soviet-Afghan War, and films set in specific domains of war, such as the infantry, the air, at sea, in submarines, or at prisoner-of-war camps. Genre. Further information, list of war films. The war film genre is not necessarily tightly defined. The American Film Institute, for example, speaks of films to grapple with the Great War without attempting to classify these. However, some directors and critics have offered at least tentative definitions. The director Sam Fuller defined the genre by saying that a war film's objective, no matter how personal or emotional, is to make a viewer feel war. 4. John Belton identified 4 narrative elements of the war film within the context of Hollywood production. A. The suspension of civilian morality during times of war. B. Primacy of collective goals over individual motivations. C. Rivalry between men in predominantly male groups as well as marginalization and objectification of women. And D. Depiction of the reintegration of veterans. 5. The fateful nature of battle scenes means that war films often end with them. 6. John Wayne in The Longest Day, 1962. The film critic Stephen Neal suggests that the genre is for the most part well-defined and uncontentious, since war films are simply those about war being waged in the 20th century, with combat scenes central to the drama. However, Neal notes, films set in the American Civil War or the American Indian Wars of the 19th century were called war films in the time before the First World War. 1. The critic Julian Smith argues, on the contrary, that the war film lacks the formal boundaries of a genre like the Western, but that in practice, successful and influential, war films are about modern wars, in particular World War II, with the combination of mobile forces and mass killing. 2. The film scholar Catherine Kane, 7. Points out some similarities between the war film genre and the Western. Both genres use opposing concepts like war and peace, civilization, and savagery. War films usually frame World War II as a conflict between good and evil, as represented by the Allied forces and Nazi Germany, whereas the Western portrays the conflict between civilized settlers and the savage indigenous peoples. 8. James Clark notes the similarity between a Western like Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch and war movie escapades, like The Dirty Dozen. 9. The film historian Janine Basinger states that she began with a preconception of what the war film genre would be, namely that what I knew in advance was what presumably every member of our culture would know about World War II combat films, that they contained a hero, a group of mixed types of people, and a military objective of some sort. They take place in the actual combat zones of World War II, against the established enemies, on the ground, the sea, or in the air. They contain many repeated events, such as mail call, all presented visually with appropriate uniforms, equipment, and iconography of battle. 10. Further, Basinger considers Batan to provide a definition by example of the World War II combat film, in which a diverse and apparently unsuited group of hastily assembled volunteers hold off a much larger group of the enemy through their bravery and tenacity. 11. She argues that the combat film is not a subgenre but the only genuine kind of war film. Since she notes that there were in fact only 5 true combat films made during the Second World War, In her view, these few films, central to the genre, are outweighed by the many other films that are only just war films. 12. However, other critics such as Russell O'Shane propose a far broader definition of war film, to include films that deal with the roles of civilians, espionage agents, and soldiers in any of the aspects of war, i.e. preparation, cause, prevention, conduct, daily life, and consequences or aftermath. 13. Neil points out that genres overlap, with combat scenes for different purposes in other types of film, and suggests that war films are characterized by combat, which determines the fate of the principal characters. This in turn pushes combat scenes to the climactic ends of war films. 6. Not all critics agree, either, that war films must be about 20th century wars. James Clark includes Edward Zwick's Oscar-winning Glory, 1990, among the war films he discusses in detail. It is set in the American Civil War, and he lists 6 other films about that war which he considers notable. 14. A. The screenwriter and scholar Eric A. Williams identifies war films as one of 11 supergenres in his screenwriter's taxonomy, claiming that all feature-length narrative films can be classified as belonging to one of them. B. 16. The British military historian Anthony Beevor despairs at how filmmakers from America and Britain play fast and loose with the facts, yet imply that their version is as good as the truth. 17. For example, he calls the 2000 American film U-571 a shameless deception for pretending that a U.S. warship had helped to win the Battle of the Atlantic 7 months before America entered the war. 17. He is equally critical of Christopher Nolan's 2017 film Dunkirk with its unhistorically empty beaches, low-level air combat over the sea, and rescues mainly by the little ships. 17. Beevor feels, however, that continental European filmmakers are often far more scrupulous. For example, in his view, the 2004 German film Downfall accurately depicted the historical events of Hitler's final days in his Berlin bunker. 17. And he considers the 1965 French film The 317th Platoon, set in Vietnam, the greatest war movie ever made. The 1966 film The Battle of Algiers is, he argues, a close second. The costliest war in U.S. history in terms of American life, this war has been the subject of, or the backdrop to, numerous films, documentaries, and miniseries. One of the earliest films using the Civil War as its subject was D.W. Griffith's 1910 silent picture, The Fugitive. 18. Films that have the war as its main subject, or about a certain aspect of the war, include the 1989 film Glory, about the first formal unit of the Union Army during the American Civil War to be made up entirely of black volunteers. 19. Some films such as Gettysburg focused on a single battle during the war. 20. Or even on a single incident, like the French short film Ma Rivière du Hibou, an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. 21. And Disney's The Great Locomotive Chase, 1956. 22. Others like the 1993 miniseries North and South span the entire breadth of the war. Some films deal with the human aspects of the war, such as The Red Badge of Courage, 1951, 23, or Shenandoah, 1965, on the tragedy that the war inflicted on the civilian population. 24. Ken Burns's The Civil War is the most watched documentary in the history of PBS. 1918 film poster for Die Grosse Schlacht in Frankreich, The Great Battle in France, with Hindenburg in the background. The Spanish-American War. The first war films come from the Spanish-American War of 1898. Short actualities, documentary film clips, included burial of the main victims, blanket tossing of a new recruit, and soldiers washing dishes. These non-combat films were accompanied by reenactments of fighting, such as of Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders in action against the Spanish, staged in the United States. Further information, fiction based on World War I, History of the United Kingdom during the First World War section media, United States home front during World War I section motion pictures, and home front during World War I. During the First World War, many films were made about life in the war. Topics included prisoners of war, covert operations, and military training. Both the Central Powers and the Allies produced war documentaries. The films were also used as propaganda in neutral countries like the United States. Among these was a film shot on the Eastern Front by official war photographer to the Central Powers, Albert K. Dawson, The Battle and Fall of Przemysl, 1915, depicting the siege of Przemysl, disastrous for the Austrians, with incidents reenacted using soldiers as extras. The 1915 Australian film Within Our Gates, also known as Deeds That Won Gallipoli, by Frank Harvey, was described by the Motion Picture News as a really good war story, which is exceptional. 29. Staged scene of British troops advancing through barbed wire from the Battle of the Somme, 1916. The 1916 British film The Battle of the Somme, by two official cinematographers, Geoffrey Malins and John McDowell, combined documentary and propaganda, seeking to give the public an impression of what trench warfare was like. Much of the film was shot on location at the Western Front in France. It had a powerful emotional impact. It was watched by some 20 million people in Britain in its 6 weeks of exhibition, making it what the critic Francine Stock called one of the most successful films of all time. 31. The 1925 American film The Big Parade depicted unglamorous elements of war. The protagonist loses his leg, and his friends are killed. 32. William A. Wellman's Wings, 1927, showed aerial combat during the war and was made in cooperation with the Army Air Corps. It proved a powerful recruiting tool. 33. It became the first film, in any genre, to be awarded an Oscar for Best Picture. 34. Later films of varied genres that deal with the First World War include David Lean's colossal epic, both war film and biopic. 35. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, shot in the then unfamiliar and exciting 70mm Technicolor. 36. And described by Steven Spielberg as maybe the greatest screenplay ever written for the motion picture medium. Wink with a Frown. 35. Richard Attenborough's satirical anti-war musical comedy based on Joan Littlewood's play of the same name. Oh, What a Lovely War, 1969. Wink with a Frown. 37. Spielberg's 2011 war drama War Horse was based on Michael Morpurgo's children's novel of the same name. 38. Many of the films promoted as documentaries added context to authentic battlefield scenes by staging critical events, and invented episodes and dialogue to enhance excitement at the cost of authenticity. Finnish Civil War. Although the 1918 Finnish Civil War between whites and reds remained a controversial topic a century later in Finland, 41, many Finnish filmmakers have taken up the subject, often basing their work on a book. In 1957, Toivo Sarkaas 1918, based on Jarl Hemmer's play and novel, was screened at the 7th Berlin International Film Festival. 42. Recent films include Lori Torinen's 2007 The Border, 43, 44, and Aku Lohamisa's 2008 Tears of April, based on Lena Lander's novel, 45. Perhaps the most famous film about the Finnish Civil War is Edvin Lane's 1968 Here, Beneath the North Star, based on the first 2 books of Väinö Linna's Under the North Star trilogy, it describing the Civil War from the losing side, Finland's Red Guards. Spanish Civil War. Further information, List of Spanish Civil War films. Soviet poster for an exhibition about the Spanish Civil War, 1936. The Spanish Civil War has attracted directors from different countries. Sam Woods, For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1943, based on Ernest Hemingway's book of the same name, portrays the fated romance between an American played by Derry Cooper and a partisan played by Ingrid Bergman against the backdrop of the Civil War. The epic 168-minute film with its landscapes shot in Technicolor and a beautiful orchestral score was a success both with audiences and with critics. 47. Alain René's Guernica, 1950, uses Picasso's 1937 painting of the same name to protest against war. 47. Carlos Saura's La Caza, The Hunt, 1966. Uses the metaphor of hunting to criticize the aggressiveness of Spanish fascism. 48. It won the Silver Bear for Best Director at the 16th Berlin International Film Festival in 1966. 49. Ken Loach's Land and Freedom, Tierra y Libertad, 1995, loosely based on George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, follows a British communist through the war to reveal the painful contradictions within the anti-fascist Republican side. 47. Korean War. See also, category, Korean War films. Samuel Fuller's The Steel Helmet, 1951, was made during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The critic Guy Westwell notes that it questioned the conduct of the war, as did later films like The Bridges at Tokyo-ri, 1954, and Pork Chop Hill, 1959. 50. Fuller agreed that all his films were anti-war. No Hollywood films about the Korean War did well at the box office. The historian Larry May suggested in 2001 that they reminded American viewers of The Only War We Have Lost. 51. In 1955, after the fighting, the successful South Korean action film Pyagul about leftist guerrilla atrocities encouraged other filmmakers. The 1960s military government punished pro-communist filmmakers and gave Grand Bell Awards to films with the strongest anti-communist message. The Taebaek Mountains, 1994, dealt with leftists from the South who fought for the communists, while Silver Stallion, 1991, and Spring in My Hometown, 1998, showed the destructive impact of American military presence on village life. The violent action films Shiri, 1999, and Joint Security Area, 2000, presented North Korea in a favorable light. 52. Films in North Korea were made by government film studios and had clear political messages. The first was My Home Village, 1949, on the liberation of Korea from the Japanese, presented as the work of Kim Il-sung without help from the Americans. Similarly, the country's films about the Korean War show victory without help from the Chinese. The film scholar Johannes Skonhar concludes that the purpose of these films is to portray North Korea as a country under siege, and that since the U.S. and its puppet, South Korea, invaded the North once, they would do so again. 53. Algerian War. Dilo Pontecorvo's dramatic The Battle of Algiers, Italian, La Battaglia di Algérie, Arabic, French, La Bataille d'Alger, 1966, portrayed events in the Algerian War, 1954 to 1956. It was shot on location as an Italo-Algerian co-production. It had the black and white newsreel style of Italian neorealism and even-handedly depicts violence on both sides. It won various awards including Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival. 54. It was attacked by French critics and was for 5 years banned in France as well as Jamila, the Algerian, 1958. 55. Vietnam War. Further information, Vietnam War in film. Few films before the late 1970s about the Vietnam War actually depicted combat. Wink with a frown. 56. Exceptions include The Green Berets, 1968, Doc. 56. Critics such as Basinger explained that Hollywood avoided the subject because of opposition to United States involvement in the Vietnam War, making the subject divisive. In addition, the film industry was in crisis, and the Army did not wish to assist in making anti-war films. 56, 57. From the late 1970s, independently financed and produced films showed Hollywood that Vietnam could be treated in film. Successful but very different portrayals of the war in which America had been defeated included Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter, 1978, and Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979, Doc. 56. With the shift in American politics to the right in the 1980s, military success could again be shown in films such as Oliver Stone's Platoon, 1986, Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, 1987, and John Irvin's Hamburger Hill, 1987, Doc. 56. The Vietnamese director Nguyen Hong Sen, 6, as The Abandoned Field, Free Fire Zone, Can Don Ham, 1979, gives an unnerving and compelling, subjective camera eye view of life under helicopter fire in the Mekong Delta during the Vietnam War. The film cuts to an American helicopter eye view, contrasting painfully with the human tenderness seen earlier. 58. Dino Mustafik's remake, 2003, written by Zlatko Topčić, tells the parallel coming-of-age stories of a father living in Sarajevo during World War II and his son living through the siege of Sarajevo during the Bosnian War. According to Topčić, the story is based on incidents from his own life. The Iraq War served as the background story of American movies, like The Hurt Locker from 2008, Green Zone from 2010, 61, and American Sniper from 2014. The war in Afghanistan since 2001 was depicted in various movies, among them Restrepo in 2010 and Lone Survivor from 2013, 61. Second World War. Filming aboard the Royal Navy submarine HMS Tribune, playing the role of HMS Tyrant in a propaganda film, 1943. Made by Western Allies. Further information, list of Allied propaganda films of World War II. The first popular Allied war films made during the Second World War came from Britain and combined the functions of documentary and propaganda. Films such as The Lion Has Wings and Target for Tonight were made under the control of the Films Division of the Ministry of Information. The British film industry began to combine documentary techniques with fictional stories in films like Noel Coward and David Lean's In Which We Serve, 1942, the most successful British film of the war years, 62, Millions Like Us, 1943, and The Way Ahead, 1944, Doc. 63. B-25's about to launch from the USS Hornet in 30 seconds over Tokyo, 1944. In America, documentaries were produced in various ways. General Marshall commissioned the Why We Fight propaganda series from Frank Capra. The War Department's Information Education Division started out making training films for the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy. The Army made its own through the U.S. Signal Corps, including John Huston's The Battle of San Pietro, 64. Hollywood made films with propaganda messages about America's allies, such as Mrs. Miniver, 1942, which portrayed a British family on the home front. Wink with a frown. 65, Edge of Darkness, 1943, showed Norwegian resistance fighters, 66, and The North Star, 1943, showed the Soviet Union and its Communist Party, 67. Towards the end of the war, popular books provided higher quality and more serious stories for films such as Guadalcanal Diary, 1943, 68. Mervyn LeRoy's 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1944, 69, and John Ford's They Were Expendable, 1945, 70. Screenshot from Moscow Strikes Back, 1942. Snow camouflage Russian ski infantry ride into battle on BT-7 cavalry tanks in the Battle of Moscow. The Soviet Union, too, appreciated the propaganda value of film to publicize both victories and German atrocities. Ilya Kopolin's documentary Moscow Strikes Back, Russian, literally, The Rout of the German Troops Near Moscow, was made during the Battle of Moscow between October 1941 and January 1942. It depicted civilians helping to defend the city, the parade in Red Square and Stalin's speech rousing the Russian people to battle, actual fighting, Germans surrendering and dead, and atrocities including murdered children and hanged civilians. It won an Academy Award in 1943 for Best Documentary. 71, 72, newsreel cameras were similarly rushed to Stalingrad early in 1943 to record the spectacle which greeted the Russian soldiers, the starvation of Russian prisoners of war in the Vorpovono camp by the German Sixth Army, defeated in the Battle of Stalingrad, 73. Feature films made in the West during the war were subject to censorship and were not always realistic in nature. One of the first to attempt to represent violence, and which was praised at the time for gritty realism, was Take Arnett's Bataan, 1943. The depiction actually remains stylized. Janine Basenberg gives as an example the worst image for stark violence. When a Japanese soldier beheads an American, the victim shows pain and his lips freeze in a scream, yet no blood spurts and his head does not fall off. Basinger points out that while this is physically unrealistic, psychologically it may not have been. The wartime audience was, she points out, well aware of friends and relatives who had been killed or who had come home wounded. 74. Hitler and Goebbels visiting Universum Film AG in 1935. The studio made propaganda films such as Triumph de Willens, 1935, and Kohlberg, 1945. The Axis powers similarly made films during the Second World War for propaganda and other purposes. In Germany, the Army High Command brought out Sieg im Westen, Victory in the West, 1941. 75. Other Nazi propaganda films had varied subjects, as with Cobra, 1945, which depicts stubborn Prussian resistance in the Siege of Cobra, 1807, to the invading French troops under Napoleon, 76. The propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels chose the historical subject as suitable for the worsening situation facing Nazi Germany when it was filmed from October 1943 to August 1944. At over 8 million marks, using thousands of soldiers as extras and 100 railway wagon loads of salt to simulate snow, it was the most costly German film made during the war. The actual siege ended with the surrender of the town. In the film, the French generals abandoned the siege. 77. For Japan, the war began with the undeclared war and invasion of China in 1937, which the Japanese authorities call the China Incident. The government dispatched a pen brigade to write and film the action in China with humanist values. To Monica Tosaka's Mud and Soldiers, 1939, for instance, shot on location in China, Kozaburo Yoshimura's Legend of Tank Commander Nishizumi, and Satoru Takashi's Chocolate and Soldiers, 1938, show the common Japanese soldier as an individual and as a family man, and even enemy Chinese soldiers are presented as individuals, sometimes fighting bravely. 78. Once war with the United States was declared, the Japanese conflict became known as the Pacific War. Japanese film critics worried that even with Western film techniques, their film output failed to represent native Japanese values. 79, the historian John Dowler found that Japanese wartime films had been largely forgotten, as losers did not get reruns, yet they were so subtle and skillful that Frank Capra thought Chocolate and Soldiers unbeatable. Heroes were typically low-ranking officers, not samurai, calmly devoted to his men and his country. 80. These films did not personalize the enemy and therefore lacked hatred, though Great Britain could figure as the cultural enemy. For Japanese filmmakers, war was not a cause but more like a natural disaster, and what mattered was not whom one fought but how well. Asian enemies, especially the Chinese, were often portrayed as redeemable and even possible marriage partners. Japanese wartime films do not glorify war, but present the Japanese state as one great family and the Japanese people as an innocent, suffering, self-sacrificing people. Dower comments that the perversity of this image is obvious and is devoid of any recognition that, at every level, the Japanese also victimized others. 81. Post-war. Further information, list of World War II films. Shooting a scene from a bridge too far on location in Deventer, Netherlands, 1977. According to Andrew Pulver of The Guardian, the public fascination with war films became an obsession, with over 200 war films produced in each decade of the 1950s and 1960s. 82. War film production in the United Kingdom and United States reached its zenith in the mid-1950s. 83. Its popularity in the United Kingdom was brought on by the critical and commercial success of Charles Friend's The Cruel Sea, 1953. 83. Like others of the period, The Cruel Sea was based on a best-selling novel, in this case the former naval commander Nicholas Montserrat's story of the Battle of the Atlantic. 84. 85. Others, like The Dam Busters, 1954, with its exciting tale of the inventor Bonds Wallace's unorthodox bouncing ball and its distinctive theme music, were true stories. The Dam Busters became the most popular film in Britain in 1955, 86, and remained a favorite as of 2015 with a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. 87, though, partly because it celebrated an exclusively British victory, it failed in the American market. 88. A large number of war films were made in the 1955 to 1958 period in particular. In 1957 alone, Bitter Victory, Count 5 and Die, The Enemy Below, Though Met by Moonlight, Men in War, The One That Got Away, and Seven Thunders, and the highly successful, critically acclaimed pictures The Bridge on the River Kwai, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture that year. 89, and Paths of Glory were released. 90. Some, such as Bitter Victory, focused more on the psychological battle between officers and egotism rather than events during the war. 91. The Bridge on the River Kwai brought a new complexity to the war picture, with a sense of moral uncertainty surrounding war. By the end of the decade, the sense of shared achievement, which had been common in war films, began to evaporate, according to Pulver. 82. Hollywood films in the 1950s and 1960s could display spectacular heroics or self-sacrifice, as in the popular Sands of Iwo Jima, 1949, starring John Wayne. U.S. Marines considered Sands of Iwo Jima visually authentic, but found Lewis Milestone's Battle Cry, 1955, with its attention to the lives of the men, the more realistic film. 92. The formula for a successful war film consisted, according to Lawrence Seward, of a small group of ethnically diverse men, an unreasonable senior officer, cowards became heroic, or died. 92. Janine Basinger suggests that a traditional war film should have a hero, a group, and an objective, and that the group should contain an Italian, a Jew, a cynical complainer from Brooklyn, a sharpshooter from the mountains, a Midwesterner, nicknamed by his state, Iowa, or Dakota, and a character who must be initiated in some way. 74. Films based on real commando missions, like The Dift Horse, 1952, based on the St. Nazaire raid, and Il Mat by Moonlight, 1956, based on the capture of the German commander of Crete, inspired fictional adventure films such as The Guns of Navarone, 1961, The Train, 1964, and Where Eagles Dare, 1968. These used the war as a backdrop for spectacular action. 82. Supposed realism, the commemorative Air Force's Gulf Coast Wings Tora. Teens simulating the attack on Pearl Harbor with a wall of fire instead of explosions, using planes such as T-6 Texans converted to resemble Mitsubishi A6N0s, and generating smoke. 93. C. 2008. Daryl F. Zanuck produced the 178-minute documentary drama The Longest Day, 1962, based on the first day of the D-Day landings, achieving commercial success and Oscars. 94. It was followed by large-scale but thoughtful films like Andrei Tarkovsky's Ivan's Childhood, 1962, and quasi-documentary all-star epics filmed in Europe such as Battle of the Bulge, 1965, Battle of Britain, 1969, The Battle of Neretva, 1969, Midway, 1976, and The Bridge Too Far, 1977. In Lawrence Suett's view, The Longest Day served as the model for all subsequent combat spectaculars. 95. However, its cost also made it the last of the traditional war films, while the controversy around the help given by the U.S. Army and Zanuck's disregard for Pentagon relations changed the way that Hollywood and the Army collaborated. 95. Zanuck, by then an executive at 20th Century Fox, set up an American-Japanese co-production for Richard Fleischer's Tora. 1970, to depict what really happened on December 7, 1941, in the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. 96. 97, the film, panned by Roger Ebert. 98, in the New York Times. 99, was a major success in Japan. 96, its realistic-looking attack footage was reused in later films such as Midway. 1976, The Final Countdown. 1980, in Australia. 2008. 100, the story was revisited in Pearl Harbor. 2001, described by the New York Times as a noisy, expensive, and very long new blockbuster, with the comment that, for all its epic pretensions, as if epic were a matter of running time, tumescent music and earnest voiceover pronouncements, the movie works best as a bang-and-boom action picture. 101. Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, 1998, uses handheld camera, sound design, staging, and increased audiovisual detail to defamiliarize viewers accustomed to conventional combat films, so as to create what film historian Stuart Bender calls reported realism, whether or not the portrayal is genuinely more realistic. 102. Janine Basinger notes that critics experienced it as groundbreaking and anti-generic, with, in James Walcott's words, desire to bury the cornball, recruiting poster legend of John Wayne, to get it right this time, and that combat films have always been grounded in the need to help an audience understand and accept war. 74. Its success revived interest in World War II films. 103. Others tried to portray the reality of the war, as in Joseph Filsmayer's Stalingrad, 1993, which the New York Times said, goes about as far as a movie can go in depicting modern warfare as a stomach-turning form of mass slaughter. 104. Colonel Frank Capra, Wright, of the U.S. Army Signal Corps confers with Captain Roy Bolting of the British Army Film Unit on the editing of the film Tunisian Victory in February 1944. Many war films have been produced with the cooperation of a nation's military forces. Since the Second World War, the United States Navy has provided ships and technical guidance for films such as Top Gun. The U.S. Air Force assisted with The Big Lift, Strategic Air Command, and A Gathering of Eagles, which were filmed on Air Force bases. Air Force personnel appeared in many roles. 105. Critics have argued that the film Pearl Harbor's U.S.-biased portrayal of events is a compensation for technical assistance received from the U.S. Armed Forces, noting that the premiere was held on board a U.S. Navy carrier. 106. In another case, the U.S. Navy objected to elements of Crimson Tide, especially nude neon, board an American naval vessel, so the film was produced without their assistance. 107. The film historian Jonathan Rayner observes that such films have also clearly been intended to serve vital propagandist, recruitment, and public relations functions. The first Chinese war films were newsreels like Battle of Wuhan, 1911, and Battle of Shanghai, 1913. Still in films such as Su Xinfu's Battle Exploits, 1925, were featured mainly as background. Only with the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 onwards did war film become a serious genre in China, with nationalistic films such as Shi Dongshan's Protect Our Land, 1938. The Chinese Civil War, too, attracted films such as Qin Yin's From Victory to Victory, 1952. A more humanistic film set in the same period is Xie Jin's The Cradle, 1979, while more recent large-scale commercial films include Mu Chuan's City of Life and Death, 2009. 108. Chinese directors have repeatedly attempted to cover the atrocities committed by the Japanese during the Nanjing Massacre, 1937–1938, with films such as the political melodrama Massacre in Nanjing, Mao Tun-Fei's docudrama Black Sun, the Nanking Massacre, and the contrived Sino-Japanese romance, Don't Cry, Nanking. 109. Zhang Yimou's epic Chinese film Flowers of War, 2011, based on Delian Yan's novel, portrays the violent events through the eyes of a 13-year-old girl. 110. Indonesian. The Siliwangi Division in combat, in a scene from Usmar Ismail's Darat dan Doa, 1950. Many Indonesian films deal with the occupation of the archipelago by the Japanese during the Second World War. Tiga Karya Dia Tanda Mata, Mementos, literally, Two Eye Marks, 1985, covers the limited nationalist resistance to Dutch colonial rule in the 1930s. A third group of films such as Anand Jan di Jogja, 6 Hours in Yogyakarta, 1951, and Serangdan Fajar, Attack at Dawn, 1983, covers the Indonesian War of Independence, 1945–1949. Two other films about the same period portray the Indonesian equivalent of the Chinese Long March, Usmar Ismail's Darat dan Doa, The Long March, literally, Blood and Prayer, 1950, and Marika Kembali, They Return, 1975. Each of these films interprets the past from the perspective of its own time. The more recent Merdeka, Freedom, trilogy, 2009–2011, starting with Merah Putih, Red and White, the colors of the flag of the new Indonesia, revisits the campaign for independence through the lives of a diverse group of cadets who become guerrillas. 113. Karya's November 1828, 1979, looks at Indonesia's struggle for independence through historical drama about the Java or Diponegoro War, 1825–1830, though the colonial enemy was the same, the Dutch. Deanne Schultz considered it a valuable interpretation of Indonesian history that embodies the best of popular Indonesian cinema. It was the first Indonesian film to become well known internationally. Russia's Cinema Front, Yuri Ozerov, left directing the filming of Stalingrad, 1987. War has been the Soviet Union's cinema's major genre, becoming known indeed as the cinema front, and its war films ranged from grim portrayals of atrocities to sentimental and even quietly subversive accounts. 115, Leonid Lukhov's popular and beautiful 116, Two Warriors, 1943, depicted two stereotypical Soviet soldiers, a quiet Russian and an extrovert Southerner from Odessa, singing in his dugout. See also, section Animated, and category, Japanese war films. Japanese directors have made popular films such as Submarine I-57 Will Not Surrender, 1959, Battle of Okinawa, 1971, and Japan's Longest Day, 1967. From a Japanese perspective, 119, these generally fail to explain the cause of the war. 120, in the decades immediately after the Second World War, Japanese films often focused on human tragedy rather than combat, such as The Burmese Hop, 1956, and Fires on the Plain, 1959. 120, from the late 1990s, films started to take a positive view of the war and of Japanese actions. These nationalistic films, including Pride, 1998, Mordiko 17805, 2001, and The Truth About Nanjing, 2007, have emphasized positive traits of the Japanese military and contended that the Japanese were victims of post-war vindictiveness and viciousness. Such films have, however, been subject to protest for revisionism. The Eternal Zero, 2013, narrates the tale of a Zero fighter pilot who is considered a coward by his comrades as he returns alive from his missions. It broke the record takings for a Japanese live-action film, 123, and won the Golden Mulberry at the Udine Far East Film Festival, 124, but was criticized for its nationalistic sympathy with kamikaze pilots. Further information, documentary war film and list of World War II documentary films. The wartime authorities in both Britain and America produced a wide variety of documentary films. Their purposes included military training, advice to civilians, and encouragement to maintain security. Since these films often carried messages, they grayed into propaganda. Similarly, commercially produced films often combined information, support for the war effort, and a degree of propaganda. 63, 64, newsreels, ostensibly simply for information, were made in both Allied and Axis countries, and were often dramatized. 126, 127, 128. More recently, in the Iran-Iraq War, Mortisa Avini's Rivayati Faf, Chronicles of Victory, television series combined frontline footage with commentary. Further information, Comedy Film Section Military Comedy. Charlie Chaplin's Shoulder Arms, 1918, set a style for war films to come, and was the first comedy about war in film history. British cinema in the Second World War marked the evacuation of children from London with social comedies such as Those Kids from Town, 1942, where the evacuees go to stay with an earl, while in Cottage to Let, 1941, and Went the Day Well? 1942, The English Countryside is Thick with Spies. Gasbags, 1941, offered, zany, irreverent, knockabout, comedy making fun of everything from barrage balloons to concentration camps. Abbott and Costello's Buck Privates, 1941, was successful in America, leading to many further wartime comedies. First animated propaganda film, Winsor McCay's The Sinking of the Lusitania, 1918. Winsor McCay's The Sinking of the Lusitania, 1918, was a silent First World War film. At 12 minutes long, it was the longest animated film made at that time. It was probably the first animated propaganda film to be made. It remains the earliest serious animated drama that has survived. Through World War II, animated propaganda shorts remained influential in American cinema. The Walt Disney Company, working with the American Armed Forces, produced 400,000 feet of war propaganda films between 1942 and 1945, 156, including Der Führer's Face, 1943, and Education for Deaf, 1943. Japanese anime films from the 1960s onwards addressed national memories of war. Akira, 1988, moves from the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to apocalyptic visions of global conflict. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988, is elegiac on the effect of war on children. 158, 159, Barefoot Gen, 1983, portrays the bombing of Hiroshima through the eyes of a child. 160. But reviewers consider it a less well-made film than Grave of the Fireflies, with stomach-churning detail, bizarrely paired with crude artwork, giving it the look of a Saturday morning Warner Brothers cartoon. Anti-war, Lewis Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. The anti-war genre began with films about the First World War. Films in the genre are typically revisionist, reflecting on past events and often generically blended. Lewis Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930, was unquestionably powerful and an early anti-war film, portraying a German point of view. That was the first film, in any genre, to win 2 Oscars, Best Picture and Best Director. 148. Andrew Kelly, analyzing All Quiet on the Western Front, defined the genre as showing the brutality of war, the amount of human suffering, the betrayal of men's trust by incompetent officers. War and anti-war films often prove difficult to categorize as they contain many generic ambiguities. 1. While many anti-war films criticize war directly through depictions of grisly combat in past wars, some films such as Penn's Alice's Restaurant criticized war obliquely by poking fun at such things as the draft board. 162. The number of anti-war films produced in America dipped sharply during the 1950s because of McCarthyism and the Hollywood blacklist. 163. The end of the blacklist and the introduction of the MPAA rating system marked a time of resurgence for films of all type, including anti-war films in the States. Robert Eberwein names 2 films as anti-war classics. 164. The first is Jean Renoir's Prisoner of War masterpiece. 148. La Grande Illusion, The Grand Illusion, 1937. Renoir's critique of contemporary politics and ideology celebrates the universal humanity that transcends national and racial boundaries and radical nationalism, suggesting that mankind's common experiences should prevail above political division and its extension, war. The second is Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, 1957. The critic David Ehrenstein writes that Paths of Glory established Kubrick as the leading commercial filmmaker of his generation and a world-class talent. Ehrenstein describes the film as an outwardly cool/inwardly passionate protest drama about a disastrous French army maneuver and the court-martial held in its wake, contrasting it with the classic All Quiet on the Western Front story of an innocent, unstrung by the horrors of war. Comedy gave scope for satire, and post-war filmmakers merged comedy and anti-war sentiment in films as varied as Stalag 17, 1953, and Dr. Strangelove, 1964. 167. Black comedies like Mike Nichols's Catch, 22, 1970, based on Joseph Heller's satirical novel about the Second World War, and Robert Altman's M********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* Korea reflected the attitudes of an increasingly skeptical public during the Vietnam War. Other genres were combined in Franklin J. Schaffner's Patton, 1970, about real-life General George S. Patton, where combat scenes were interleaved with commentary about how he waged war, showing good and bad sides to a command. It and MASH became the two most profitable war/anti-war films made up to that time, 169, and Patton won 7 Academy Awards. Drawing heavily from the theories of literary genre criticism, film genres are usually delineated by conventions, iconography, settings, narratives, characters, and actors. 3. One can also classify films by the tone, theme/topic, mood, format, target audience, or budget. 4. These characteristics are most evident in genre films, which are commercial feature films that, through repetition and variation, tell familiar stories with familiar characters and familiar situations in a given genre. 5. A film's genre will influence the use of filmmaking styles and techniques, such as the use of flashbacks and low-key lighting in film noir, tight framing in horror films, or fonts that look like rough-hewn logs for the titles of Western films. 6. In addition, genres have associated film scoring conventions, such as lush string orchestras for romantic melodramas or electronic music for science fiction films. 6. Genre also affects how films are broadcast on television, advertised, and organized. In video rental stores, Alan Williams distinguishes 3 main genre categories: narrative, avant-garde, and documentary. With the proliferation of particular genres, film subgenres can also emerge. The legal drama, for example, is a subgenre of drama that includes courtroom and trial-focused films. Subgenres are often a mixture of 2 separate genres. Genres can also merge with seemingly unrelated ones to form hybrid genres, where popular combinations include the romantic comedy and the action comedy film. Broader examples include the docufiction and docudrama, which merge the basic categories of fiction and nonfiction. Documentary genres are not fixed, they change and evolve over time, and some genres may largely disappear, for example, the melodrama. Not only does genre refer to a type of film or its category, a key role is also played by the expectations of an audience about a film, as well as institutional discourses that create generic structures. Overview. Characteristics of particular genres are most evident in genre films, which are commercial feature films that, through repetition and variation, tell familiar stories with familiar characters and familiar situations in a given genre. Drawing heavily from the theories of literary genre criticism, film genres are usually delineated by conventions, iconography, narratives, formats, characters, and actors, all of which can vary according to the genre in terms of standard or stock characters. Those in film noir, for example, include the femme fatale, 9, and the hard-boiled detective, while those in westerns, stock characters include the schoolmarm and the gunslinger. Regarding actors, some may acquire a reputation linked to a single genre, such as John Wayne, the western, or Fred Astaire, the musical. Some genres have been characterized or known to use particular formats, which refers to the way in which films are shot, e.g., 35 mm, 16 mm, or 8 mm, or the manner of presentation, e.g., anamorphic widescreen. Genres can also be classified by more inherent characteristics, usually implied in their names, such as settings, theme/topic, mood, target audience, or budget/type of production.